From the United States to Eastern Europe, Ukrainian law enforcement has extradited a Russian soldier to Lithuania, where he'll be put on trial for alleged war crimes. The move has been described by Kiev as a historic first. The transferred soldier stands accused of torturing civilians and prisoners of war in the Ukrainian city of Melitopol, where one of his alleged victims was a Lithuanian citizen.
Слідчі поліції вперше екстрадували громадянина Російської Федерації.
Police investigators have extradited a Russian citizen to Lithuania for war crimes for the first time. This concerns the transfer to the Republic of Lithuania of a serviceman of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, involved in the torture of civilians in Melitopol. In April 2022, Russian military personnel illegally detained Ukrainian citizens and a Lithuanian citizen who was in the city and engaged in volunteer activities, helping the civilian population, and had no connection to military actions. The detainees were held in facilities on the territory of the airfield. There, they were subjected to torture, beaten, threatened with weapons, kept in inhumane conditions, and psychologically pressured. Investigators from the main investigation department of the National Police, together with Lithuanian law enforcement and the Office of the Prosecutor General, conducted a series of investigative actions that identified those involved in the war crime. This step sets an important precedent and evidence of Ukraine's readiness for active international cooperation in combating war crimes, as well as confirmation of the principle of inevitability of punishment for every war criminal.
Боротьбі з воєнними злочинами, а також підтвердженням принципу невідворотності покарання для кожного воєнного злочинця.
Well, for more on this, I'm being joined now on the line from London by author and international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Great to have you, Marek. Now, what will be the legal and diplomatic significance of this action by the Ukrainian authorities, handing over a Russian soldier to Lithuania to be tried for war crimes?
Well, it will be very, very happy news for the West. It shows Ukraine, for Ukrainians, that it is acting and trying to push war crimes further. It's good news for Lithuania that one of their citizens who was tortured will now the condign punishment for the people concerned. So everybody will be very happy. However, what no one seems to have realized is there's another aspect to this. There's a hidden message in all this. It must be borne in mind that the President Zelensky, for years on end, as part of his, open inverted commas, peace proposals, close inverted commas, insisted that the Russians should be tried for war crimes and have to pay reparations. The problem here is that this means that Russia, and Putin in particular, cannot lose. It therefore follows, and this is what the message is here about sending this soldier off to Lithuania, is that Ukraine intends to push on with these war crimes. And the implication, therefore, Putin is, if he does not wish to suffer an ignominious end, like the Nazis when they lost the war, he has to win. And this, of course, is entirely in keeping with my books, which says that Russia will escalate the war, and this is one more step towards their doing so, which will be an attack on Poland.
Now, Ukraine's Prosecutor General, Ruslan Kravchenko, said one of the victims was a Lithuanian citizen. Now, is it that there's a gap in the Ukrainian justice system, and that's from a legal point of view? Is it that there's a gap in the Ukrainian justice system that could not convict that Russian soldier when a greater number of his victims were most possibly Ukrainians, and then he now has to be handed over to Lithuania, who had one victim?
Quite right, and a very good observation, because the whole thing is political. You're quite right in saying that had this been a normal case, then Ukraine would have tried him, but they're trying to embroil as many countries on their side as possible, and by sending the soldier to Lithuania, they're in effect trying to get Lithuania and other nations to commit themselves more to the Ukrainian side. Moreover, it's excellent PR because it will send the soldier abroad to a NATO country, please note, and therefore this is yet one more feather in the cap for Ukraine, and that more Ukrainians suffered, well, that's irrelevant in all this as far as they're concerned, because as you heard the speeches made by the Ukrainians, it is largely for show. For Lithuania, there is a sting in the tail. It does mean that if they actually convict him, that they are, so to speak, putting themselves in direct firing line of the Russians. When the Russians left Ukraine back years ago in the 1990, they actually stated that they will be back. And clearly, Lithuania, in accepting this Russian soldier, has made it quite clear it wants to be involved in a war with Russia.
Now, as a matter of fact, that even brings me to my next question. So, this means essentially that if that soldier is convicted, it now places Moscow and Vilnius in a collision course. But then what does that say in real terms for a possibility of the conflict extending to include Lithuania, that conflict between Ukraine and Russia? Is there any such possibility that it would also extend to include Lithuania just in case the Russian soldier gets convicted?
Yes. However, although it will extend the conflict, and however, although you state quite accurately this puts Lithuania on collision course with Moscow, the attack will come on Poland. It will be a nuclear attack at that, because obviously conventional war is not working out well for the Russians. And this will take out Poland first, because Lithuania can be mopped up at will afterwards. It does not mean the Russians are going to forgive and forget that their soldier has been sent to Lithuania. It does not mean that Russia won't be pressurizing Lithuania. Undoubtedly they will. And moreover, please note the Suwalki Gap could be, in theory, go also through Lithuania, not just Poland. However, according to all the predictions I've made, the key country that they'll be taking out is Poland. And that's the one where the nuclear attack will come on, as I've stated in my books. But this means, and this is a very important point, the action of going to a NATO country, sending the soldier there, as you rightly says, put Lithuania on a collision course, and it makes such attacks eventually on Lithuania itself more likely.
Now, this extradition has been described as a first. Now, if it's a first, then is it pointed to another dynamic in the Russia-Ukraine war in the future?
Yes. As I've said before, it's a message Ukraine is sending to Russia that intends to pursue the war crimes allegations against President Putin and other Russian soldiers. It is also an indication that it's insofar as it can recapture any Russian territory, there will be, at the very least, be such arrests made and such trials. It shows that Ukraine is prepared to use all the weapons at its disposal, including judiciary ones. And so from this point of view, yes, it is a historic first in its way. It's an interesting way to put it, of course, but it is actually an escalation of sorts. And we've yet to see how Russia will reply. There are two possibilities. The loss of one single soldier isn't very great. So from that point of view, Russia would ignore it. But the PR value of now being able to pressurize Lithuania because they've taken in a Russian soldier is surely too great for Russia to omit. And I presume that they will have something to say and be the aggrieved party in all this.
Now, Ukraine, it was actually Ukraine's attempt to join NATO that actually brought it in direct conflict with Russia. However, Lithuania is already a NATO country, going by the facts on the ground. Now, when this has happened, it stands to wonder what is the nature of relations between Russia and its Eastern European neighbors, and that also includes Ukraine. Sorry, that also includes Lithuania. Now, I would imagine that if Ukraine is seeking more alliances with its Eastern European neighbors, where does that leave Russia in terms of its relations with their fellow Eastern Europeans, former members of the Soviet republics?
Russia has mixed relations with Eastern Europe. Hungary, for example, Slovakia, Czechs, even many Romanians are not at all enthusiastic about fighting Russia and actually are, so to speak, at the very least, neutral. Here, therefore, Ukraine in Lithuania has a more enthusiastic partner because all the Baltic states have decided that they can rely upon NATO and therefore take a more a belligerent tone towards Russia. The most belligerent, of course, is Poland, which throughout the 3 years has never ceased to make its views quite clear to Russia about how it views the whole conflict. It is very anti-Russian in that respect. So therefore, the relations between Russia and Eastern Europe are not as simple negative as your question implies, because it does have some allies. Moreover, there is the other aspect here of whether NATO can actually deliver should Russia move, because please note, Clause 5 it shows that countries need not go to the support of each other. And so therefore, the situation is very fraught, and it'll be interesting to see what Russia does about this action.
Now that brings us to the question of war crimes, particularly in that conflict. Have there been allegations of war crimes committed, allegations and also statistics probably by independent investigators of war crimes committed on both sides of the divide so far?
Russia has been accused virtually since day one of war crimes. The very act of invasion has been seen as a war crime. This is the basis of the accusation against President Putin. But in addition, there have been many allegations of children being kidnapped by the Russians and of various atrocities, including of torture and imprisonment. On the other side, there have been allegations that when the Ukrainians recaptured areas, that they executed collaborators. However, what can we, therefore, looking from the outside, say? Well, it looks to be a normal standard war, to be truthful, where everybody is accusing everybody else. The exact level will be determined afterwards, but in the heat of war, so to speak, it is very hard to be certain precisely what is going on because, of course, as the well-known journalist saying goes, truth is the first casualty in a war. Therefore, I would answer as follows. There have been allegations from both sides. The more serious, the more constant, on the greater number have been against the Russians. And on the whole, the impression is the Russians have committed war crimes against Ukrainians on a larger scale.
Come to think of it, are we going to be expecting a quid pro quo Russian move? Probably Russia also handing over more than one Ukrainian soldier to another country, you know, to be tried for war crimes as well.
I don't think that's how Russia will reply, because there's no percentage in it for them. Rather, they will use this to show that Lithuania is now, so to speak, declaring war, in a sense, against them. And the real question hinges on one point. Do they intend to retake the Suwalki Gap or not? If they do, then this is a godsend for them in PR terms, because it shows Lithuania is hostile to them, and it shows that Lithuania has taken action against them, and that's how it will be presented in Russia. On the other hand, if they don't want to take the Suwalki Gap, if they're going to do the same game as China's playing with Taiwan, constantly menacing but never actually doing anything, then obviously they might decide upon another action. I do not envisage them handing over any Ukrainian prisoners of war to a third party. It's simply that there's no advantage. There is an advantage for Ukraine to hand over military prisoners to other countries. There's no advantage for the Russians to do that, so they won't probably do that.
And in the event that Ukraine actually, Lithuania does get dragged into an armed conflict with Russia, on the part of Russia, wouldn't that be biting a little bit more than they can chew? I mean, Ukraine has proven to be a handful. Now, an attack on Lithuania for any reason, that wouldn't be too much for Russia, would it?
According to my analysis, first of all, they're not going to attack Lithuania but Poland. Secondly, it won't be a conventional war anymore. We're in phase 3 of a conventional war, and now the subsequent phase is to go nuclear. Russia has more nuclear weapons than any other country. These will be tactical nukes. In the event of a war, they would have no compunction using them against Poland. One of the problems they have with Ukraine is the Ukrainians are perceived by the Russians to be a type of Russia. In fact, Ukraine's other name is Little Russia, Malorossiya, which actually says it all. And Putin himself actually stated that the Russians come from Rurik, which was one of the Ukrainian kings a long, long time ago. And the point here is they've been, so to speak, using not their full resources against Ukraine. Against Poland, they'd be quite prepared to do so. And they could pick up Lithuania afterwards at will, because Lithuania is far smaller, far weaker than Ukraine. However, you're right on one point. It will most likely, they will think twice before extending a conventional war against anybody, including Lithuania, for precisely the reasons you stated. They simply are not doing well at conventional war at present.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Marek, for your views on the issue of that extradition of a Russian soldier to Lithuania for trial by the Ukrainian authorities.